Hello, this is Jim McKeith, and welcome to Connect to All the Data with FireDAC Enterprise Connectors. For the webinar, all the lines will be muted except for myself. If you do have questions, though, and you're attending live, use the Q&A panel, which I believe is going to be on the right-hand side of your screen, and submit your questions during the webinar. At the end, I'll do my best to get all the questions answered. If you are watching the replay, you can submit your questions through community.embarcadero.com, and this webinar will be recorded and the replay will be available on our YouTube channel. Like I said, my name is Jim McKeith. I'm the Chief Developer Advocate and Engineer for Embarcadero Technologies. There is my contact information for you there, Twitter, email, and you can also catch my podcast at delphi.org. Today we're going to learn about software as a service and how to access the data that is stored there. Talk about the fact that there are lots of APIs out there and how you can use those APIs to access the data. Discuss where the FireDAC Enterprise Connectors come in and how you use them, lots of demonstrations and code, and round it up with some questions and answers. Software as a service, if you're not familiar with the name, refers to software that's centrally located and used via a subscription service. Now, a really good example that is easy for people to comprehend is Office 365. You're probably familiar with the traditional Office services that Microsoft has provided for years. Office 365 is the same Office, but it is managed through a subscription service. And so instead of buying Office once, instead you pay a subscription fee that gives you access to Office as well as some other connected services. Google's G Suite is another example of that kind of taken to the next level, where all of the software runs in the cloud and through your browser. Microsoft tried that. Actually, I think they used to have some web versions of that, but the Google versions are the only way Google provides that, whereas Microsoft provides you also the ability to install the software. But the key point being is you subscribe to it, and the data has there's some sort of cloud connectivity data behind the scenes. Your data is hosted in the cloud, the application is hosted in the cloud, etc. So what does this mean? What does SaaS mean for your data that you're trying to reach? Now, back in my day, all the data stayed in its database silos where it belonged. If you wanted to get the data, you went to the Oracle database, or you went to Microsoft SQL Server and you read the data out of there, and that's the way it was, and we liked it. Today, however, data is everywhere. Each of these software as a services that you are using, and everything seems to be moving this way. Like I said, even Microsoft Office, that we're used to being as a standalone installation on your computer, is now hosting data in the cloud. Your data, your documents are being saved in the cloud, whether it be documents, whether it be Salesforce, your CRM, etc. So here's some examples of some of the places your data has gone to. In addition to traditional databases like Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, we also have the NoSQL databases like MongoDB. There's big data systems. You're probably familiar with Google's Big Table. There's other versions of that as well. The accounting systems have moved online, QuickBooks, FreshBooks, etc. Then ERP systems like Jira and Microsoft Dynamics. And then you have your customer relationship management systems or marketing systems like MailChimp and Salesforce. Also, social media is another example of software as a service, just you're not paying for that in the traditional sense. So all these are ways where your data has moved out of those traditional silos we're used to having our data in. Now, when it comes to accessing that data, it's all about the API. Everything has an API anymore. API is kind of like a DNA. All life has DNA, all software as a service has APIs. Now, there's probably exceptions to both those, but you get the idea. Everything has an API. The problem is, just like DNA, every API is different. So even if you spend the time to learn how to implement the API for one service, you then have to turn around and figure out how to implement the API for the next service you want to access. So you can't reuse that API implementation. You have to keep re-implementing it. And then to make matters worse, the APIs keep changing. They're always releasing new versions, whether it is adding features, and then eventually they'll deprecate an old API and it'll quit working. So it's like once you get it done, then they change it. You have to do it again. Like I heard once that the Brooklyn Bridge the Golden Gate Bridge takes so long to paint. By the time they get finished painting it, they have to start over at the beginning and paint it again. And that's kind of almost the way it is with APIs. Once you have all your APIs implemented, you got to start over and re-implement them because the new version's out. That's where the FireDAC Enterprise Connectors come in. Now, we all know FireDAC is the best data access framework out there. There's some other ones out there that are good, but really FireDAC is just phenomenal. And unless you have a specific reason for using a different framework, FireDAC is fantastic and there's no reason not to use it. The FireDAC Enterprise Connectors, FDEC, are additional add-ons that you get that extend the power of FireDAC, all those great features you know and love about FireDAC, like local SQL and such, to these software as a service APIs. So you don't have to understand the APIs. You don't have to understand the way they behave differently. All you need to do is understand FireDAC and standard SQL 92 compliant queries, which we all know, hopefully. And then you use those and you access this data. So let's talk about the FireDAC Enterprise Connectors. They were created by Embarcadero and in collaboration with CData. CData creates some of these services, but then what we've done is work with them to create a FireDAC implementation of them so that you can use these right from the tools that you are familiar with. They're very developer friendly. All that great, amazing design time data access that you know and love about FireDAC and Embarcadero's database access frameworks works the same way with the enterprise connectors. They're secure. They use standard enterprise class TLS SSL data encryption. And they also provide all that functionality, like I said, you love about FireDAC, that you can replicate it, make local copies or copy it to the cloud, etc., using the transfer components that are built into FireDAC. So if you need to work with the database live, if you need to work with the data in the software as a service live, you can do that, or you can pull it down locally. And then with local SQL, you can do a join between data on different services or local data or whatever you need to do. Very, very powerful. All the great features you need. Also, they're customizable. So this is a really big deal. There are other services out there where they'll do some of this data pumping behind the scenes, or like, hey, I need to pull data from Salesforce and put it into a Google spreadsheet, and they'll do that for you. But you're using their service. And actually, it's a software as a service where you're paying a monthly fee to use it. But it's not customizable. It's like they will do one sort of situation, one scenario, but not more than that. And that's one of the great things about enterprise connectors is it's customizable and configurable. You can go in and make changes you need to make, oftentimes without having to do a rebuild of things. And then it's royalty-free distribution. Again, there are other systems out there that you're paying a monthly fee to be able to perform the services. And if you need to connect to multiple services, well, then you're paying more monthly fees, for example. So a lot of those out there are being sold as an end user solution, for example, where each user is paying the fee. In this case, we license it with the FireDAC Enterprise Connectors. We license it to the developer, and then the developer can then sell their software to multiple users. So if you want to have the software used throughout your enterprise, or you want to build a software package that you're selling to another person, it's all royalty free. You don't pay per deployment. When your subscription expires, we do sell it as an annual subscription. All that expires is your ability to make a new build. Your software is going to keep running out in the field just fine, no problem. Let's take a look at how to use the FireDAC Enterprise Connectors. They're built on top of FireDAC, so they use the standard FireDAC components like the FD Manager, FD Connection, FD Query, etc. They install as FireDAC drivers, which are available with additional PhysLink components. So you can just drop the PhysLink on there and it adds all the units in you need to connect to the new services. All the trials are available through the Get It Package Manager. If you're on a recent version of RAD Studio, Delphi, or C++ Builder, go into the Get It Package Manager and you can take a look at the trials. Actually, I think there's a lot of these components, I think over 80 of them. So they might not all be in there, but a number of them are. You can take a look at that. You can use the FireDAC properties and methods that you're used to, like get table names and get field names, to query the metadata out of these services. So you don't have to really go out and learn the particular APIs of each system. You can read the documentation. There's a link to the documentation there, and use the metadata queries and go out and find the data that you need to find really quick and really easily. One note is that most of these do provide or do need an API key, which is provided by the SaaS provider. So for example, you'll have to contact Salesforce.com. They probably have a developer portal you have to go into, create an API key, put that into the component. I'll show you how this works with a few of them here in a little bit, and connect to it. Those are usually free. Sometimes if you're using a free service, they might require you to pay, go to the professional service in order to get your API key. It varies from provider to provider, so take a look at that. Once you've done all this, you just use standard SQL 92 queries and you're able to access data. This is both reading data and posting data. So for example, Twilio is a service that lets you send and receive text messages. So you can use a insert statement to send a text message through Twilio. Pretty cool. Here's an example of what it looked like on Twitter. On the left-hand side is the Twitter application portal. You go out there, you get your API keys and set things up, and then you go into the FireDAC connection editor and you provide the information there. So you select the CData driver ID, provide a callback URL. Usually the callback URL is going to be 127.0.0.1. If you read the documentation, which I linked to on the previous slide, it explains how to set this up. This is just a few things to help get you started here. You want to use, if you're going to use initiate OAuth, you're going to set it to get and refresh. And what that does is the first time it will go out and trigger the OAuth authentication. Then after that, it will just keep refreshing those tokens. And most tokens usually expire in about a year. And so as long as the user runs it at least once a year, they never have to re-authenticate again. Very nice. It manages all that for you. You specify your IDs there, your client ID and your client secret, and then also you're going to have set that path there, and that's where it stores those OAuth tokens so that you don't have to keep requesting them. You can also turn on caching, which will cache the metadata or other information locally, which kind of speeds up your performance. Very, very useful there. So that's kind of the basics of what you need to do in order to connect with the FireDAC Enterprise Connectors. And with that, it's time for some serious demonstrations. Google Spreadsheets is my go-to tool whenever I need to manipulate some data quickly and easily. I've used to use Excel a lot, but now I find I use Google Spreadsheets a whole lot more. FireDAC Enterprise Connectors makes it really easy to connect to those Google Spreadsheets and use them in my applications. So I'm going to show you how this works really quick. If you go in here to the Getting Started section, under Using OAuth and Advanced Settings, it walks you through the steps of how to get your credentials, the OAuth Client ID and OAuth Client Secret from Google in order to interface with them. Really easy to do if you just follow the instructions here. I've created a little sample application here that I'm going to show you real quick how to do a few things. I'll point a couple things out here in the documentation here. When you're selecting Google Sheets data, it turns each sheet within each spreadsheet, or I guess workbook is the term from Excel, into a table. So you specify the spreadsheet name and underscore the sheet name. And that's it. It becomes a table. If you go down here to connection parameters, this explains all the different connection parameters where you can specify, for example, if they have headers. If they don't have headers, it just turns them into a column number. Each column has a name, number, or letter, A, B, C, D, going across. You can specify if it's going to, let's see, like show blank rows, show empty rows, stuff like that as well. So lots of information in here as far as how to configure this to make it work for you. There is also right here, stored procedures. These are different stored procedures you have. So you can create a spreadsheet, delete a spreadsheet, add sheets, delete sheets, etc., all within here. So basically all the functionality you need. It doesn't actually give you the ability to format the cells, I guess, adding formatting. But from a data point of view, it gives you everything you need to do from a data point of view. So I'm going to show you how this works. The FD connection. As far as the connection settings go, all I have in here is I've changed it to get and refresh, so it'll do the automatic initial connection or get the tokens and refresh them automatically. And I've specified the client ID and client secret, which is defined in the documentation. I also added in here the runtime key so that it will work on your system even if you don't have it already installed. I'll provide a compiled version for this as well. We'll go ahead and run this here. so you can see it in action. So if you've downloaded the binary version of this, you can go here and get the credentials, punch those in there. In my case, I've got them hard-coded. So it's going to pop up here the first time you run it and ask you to sign in. So I'm just going to go ahead and sign in really quick. I've already got I'm still logged in the browser. Once I close the browser window, then it finishes the authenticate or the sign-in process. So now I've connected, and it's listing all of my sheets. And then I select each sheet, it lists all of the columns in that sheet here. The sheets and spreadsheets are system tables that give you a list of all the sheets and spreadsheets in there. Each of these represent individual spreadsheets and sheets within the spreadsheets in here. So actually I can go in here and show you real quick. I have a state info spreadsheet which has 2 sheets inside of it, state rankings and pop by region. So if we look in here, oops, that was still open. You see here is the state info, that's the spreadsheet, and pop by region, state rankings are the 2 sheets within there. So I can come in here and just hit open, and it will open that spreadsheet for me right here. You can also create a spreadsheet from here. So we'll just call it FDEC rocks and hit OK. And it didn't update this. Okay, so maybe stop and run this. I thought I had a code to refresh that, but it didn't do it. I'll fix that before I give you the code. There you go, FDEC rocks. And it just has, because I didn't have any data in there, it just says, oh, we'll treat each row as a letter here. So I can come in here, though, and say, insert into this table, and we'll just put it in A, B, C, values 1, 2, 3, and I'll hit exec, and it goes and puts the data in there, and we'll go ahead and put another one here that says 4, 5, 6, and exec again. And now, if I click here, it goes and populates it with the select statement. I hit open, and there we go, pull the data out. 1, 2, 3. Oh, so the first row I put in became the header. That's interesting. Good to know. So if I do this again and say insert into A, B, C, values 1, 2, 3, and hit execute, and then open it again. We'll see I have both rows there. So if I look in here, come back in here. So here's the spreadsheet I just created, and we'll see that became row 1. So it now has a header row, but it doesn't. It saved that information. If I close this and reopen it, let's see what happens here. Because it has the metadata saved. Okay, so now we see the columns are 1, 2, 3. So it's updated the metadata now. But anyway, you'll notice though that here I have 2 spreadsheets, but you'll see I have test and test 1 there. Those are in my trash. Interestingly, if I come here to spreadsheets and open this up, it will show this shows all the spreadsheets, and you'll see here trashed. See, on those is set to true. So those are in the trash. So just keep that in mind that we'll find spreadsheets in your trash as well. So if you come in there and like, oh my goodness, where'd all these spreadsheets come from? That's where. Let's show you, there's not really a lot to the code here. This is really, if you've done any database stuff before, you kind of know all this already. Under here, we're going to just open the connection. And let's see, in the Explorer, when you hit open, it just opens the query. I mean, there's not really anything here. The interesting thing, possibly, if you're not familiar with, okay, so when you're creating a spreadsheet, it just input box gets title, couple parameters, executes a stored procedure. Refreshing tables and fields, you just call get tables and get fields. And actually, I can add, what is it, Google Sheets here, because I don't need to have that explicitly. It creates it as a schema. So that actually make that a little simpler looking. So yeah, it's removed the Google Sheets off of there. And that's it. It's pretty straightforward. Once you're using the FireDAC Enterprise Connectors, it makes whatever you pointed at into a straightforward database that you just use all the FireDAC functionality you know and love, standard SQL 92 queries, and you're ready to go. In addition to making it really easy to connect to software as a service that's hosting data in the cloud, the FireDAC Enterprise Connectors also work with local data stores and local data files. So I'm going to show you how to use the FireDAC Enterprise Connectors to connect to a local CSV file. This also works with Excel files and other common data stores and data files. So I have a CSV file, and it's in a folder here on my computer. All I need is the copy of this folder path. And we'll go ahead and make a new VCL Delphi application. Works just the same in C++ Builder. Put down the CSV driver link file and FD connection. On the FD connection, I come in here and select the driver ID of CSV and scroll down and find the URI folder. And here's where you specify the path to the local storage or the local folder. One note is this actually supports reading CSV files via FTP, Amazon, S3, HTTP, HTTPS, as well as a number of other things as well. You can find that in the documentation here. Under Getting Started, it says connecting to CSV data sources. Here it lists the different places you could have it: Google Drive, Box, SharePoint, etc. So in this case, we're using local files, so we just give it the path to the folder. Now what it's going to do is going to go through and find every CSV file in that folder, which in our case is just one, and each one of those becomes a table. So I'm going to go ahead and test. I didn't turn off the login prompt, so it's going to come up and prompt me for that. And if we go back and look here, we see we have, it's called state rankings. So I can actually go over here to this tab here and say select star from state rankings and hit run. State rank kings, it is, does care about spelling. There we go, 71 rows. So we got the data selected here at design time in the connection editor. So now we can put down FD query, and we'll do the same thing. Select star from state rankings, and this time I will spell it correctly because I learned from my mistakes. I'll turn off the login prompt here in a second. So that worked. Let's go here, turn off the login prompt, and I'll put down a grid, a DB grid, and a data source. And we'll just connect it all up here. So data source, data set, and well, let's go ahead and do this at design time. What the heck, right? Columns editor, we'll add all those columns in here, and we'll just default them to a nice, reasonable width here. We'll say 100. There we go. Because it's pulling them in from a spreadsheet, it makes those column widths really wide by default. So there we go. We got our data at design time here from a CSV file. Now, if we go back and look at our documentation here, it explains that the okay, here under using the FireDAC components, you can query the data and manipulating the data. So it talks about that you can use updates, inserts, and deletes. So you can insert data into a CSV file, update data that's in the CSV file, and delete the data that's in the CSV file. So essentially, it's turning that CSV file into a data table for you locally, which is really quite powerful way to be able to work with CSV files. Very easy, thanks to the FireDAC Enterprise Connectors. When it's time to deploy your application, so you're going to share it with other users, you need to follow the deployment instructions. So in the documentation, you'll find under Getting Started Deployment Instructions that tells you there's a deployment licensing.txt file. So if you go into your folder where it got installed, you'll find this deployment licensing text file. And you need to copy this right here, the real-time key, and go into your... Oops, I got to unhide my components here. Your FD connection, and you put it right here. You have an FTK property, and you just put that key in there, and that will give it the ability to run on a machine that doesn't have the license installed. So I've installed the license on my machine, so everything runs fine here. But if we want to run on another machine, that's what you need the runtime key for. So you have royalty-free distribution. Put the runtime key in there. Any users that download your application and run it will be able to run it no problem. And again, that's covered right here under the Getting Started deployment instructions on how to do that. Sometimes you find that you need to do some debugging or optimization, and that's where logging comes in helpful. So there's a log file parameter that you can specify a location of a log file, just a plain text log file. And you also want to specify the verbosity. The default verbosity just logs the query, number of rows returned by it, start and execution time. So you can use that for optimization. But you can go all the way down to verbosity of 5, which will actually log all the communications going back and forward, which couldn't be useful in different situations. So I'll show you real quick how this works. I've got my Google Sheets here, and you just come down here to log file, and you put in the location of your log file. No quotes on it. If you copy it from Explorer, it puts quotes on it, but you don't want the quotes in here. I don't know why Explorer always does that. You can specify the maximum log file size, and we'll go ahead and turn on the verbosity to, we'll say 2 for now. You don't want to do this in production because it does slow it down. Maybe you might leave a log file 1 if you want to monitor it, but if you do log file 5, that is just a ton of data that's trying to write off. So let's go ahead and run this. I always use Notepad++, and the reason for that is it will, when I reopen it, so I've already got logfile.txt open here. Actually, I can just do this and go test. Test completed successfully, and now when I reopen this, it says, hey, it's been modified from the program. You want to reload it? I say, yeah. See, there we go. Now we see the log file. Let's go ahead and change the verbosity up to 5, just so you can see how much data is in here when you do this. So we'll say test, completed successfully, and now I'll go back into Notepad++, yeah, reload it. So quite a bit of data in here that you'll see, probably people email addresses in here. Yeah. So, yep, that's the basics of logging. You can get a whole lot of information in here, track down if you're having issues, optimizations, find out what's taking so much time, where the time's being consumed, etc. And that's all covered here in the documentation under connection parameters for a log file and verbosity. So if you're curious what all you can connect to with the FireDAC Enterprise Connectors and what you can do with those, I like to come out here to the CData knowledge base help section, where you can find out explore the documentation and see everything that's possible. So as you see, there is really just an amazing amount of things you can connect to here. Everything from regular old FTP servers. They have REST RSS feeds, REST, Amazon Redshift, Office 365, MySQL, so local MySQL databases, local MongoDB databases. Let's see what else is here. Twilio. Let's take a look at this one. So Twilio is a service that you can use to send and receive text messages. I think it also does voice calls as well. So let's take a look at the documentation here. And we'll go here to the FireDAC documentation. and we go to the data model here, and we can see under stored procedures, add outgoing caller ID, tables. So let's see, messages is here. We can, here we go. Here's how to send a message. You say insert into messages to, from, body. Number it's to, number it's from, and the message you want to send. You can even do images as well, media URL, via media URL. So there we go. Now we have a basic idea of, which or what components are available from the list here, what services are supported, and what you can do with those services just by quickly browsing through the documentation here. And now it's time for Q&A. If you're attending live, go ahead and put your questions in the question panel and do my best to get them answered for you. If you're watching the replay, head out to community.embarcadero.com where you can post your questions in the forums and get answers there. Thank you so much for joining me. You can find the recording and additional information at the link you see there, or contact me. And like I said, head out to community.embarcadero.com for more information. Also, visit Embarcadero.com if you're not using a current version. Check out our 30-day free architect trial. Get the latest version of Delphi, C++ Builder, or RAD Studio, and try these amazing enterprise connectors so that you too can connect to all the data.